Hey guys, tonight we venture into the dark, cold, and often slightly terrifying world of medieval nighttime, a time when rats were roommates, sleep came in shifts, and silence was never truly silent. From shared straw mats to whispered prayers against demons, nightfall wasn't a break, it was another battle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And where do we begin? With the dark? Not poetic darkness, not the kind you gaze into while pondering the mysteries of life. No, this is medieval dark, as in, can't see your own feet, probably stepped in something awful, oh well, too late, kind of dark. There are no street lamps, no cozy cottage windows glowing with firelight. If there's no moon, there's no mercy. You have the stars, maybe, or just fog. A thick, damp blackness that sticks to your skin like wet wool and smells faintly of mold, wood smoke, and unresolved sins. Step outside at night in a medieval village, and you're entering a different world entirely. One where shapes don't stay still, and that rustling in the bushes might be a rat, a thief, or a drunk pig. It's all fair game. Your eyes strain, but the dark doesn't care. It swallows up paths, tools, goats, people. Even time feels different. It stretches, loops, curls around corners. You swear it's been 10 minutes, but it's still night, still dark, still colder than it should be. If you're lucky, there's a candle, a stub of tallow melting fast, smelling worse, flickering like it's scared. Or maybe you've got a lantern, which is just a glorified box with a tiny flame and an even tinier sense of security. Light wasn't just expensive, it was sacred. And in many homes, it wasn't wasted unless someone was dying or giving birth, sometimes both. Inside, things aren't much better. Most medieval homes didn't have windows, and if they did, they were more whole than glass. Curtains? That's what your neighbour's old shirt is for. The fire pit glows faintly in the centre of the room, but not enough to read by, just enough to keep the shadows moving and the smoke curling upward, stealing air and warmth in equal measure. You sleep beside others, family, animals, lice, whoever's available. You hear everything, a cough, a creak, a distant cry that may or may not be human. No one's calling the guards. No one has guards. You just hope whatever it is doesn't get closer. And yet, people lived this way, every night, for centuries. They walked through this darkness, barefoot and half-blind, tripping over buckets and moral ambiguity. The kind of night that makes you grateful for LED bulbs, motion sensors, and the miracle of not stepping on a chicken in the dark. So yes, welcome to medieval nightfall, the perfect time to sleep. If you can. So, you've survived the walk through medieval night. Congratulations. Now it's time to sleep, or at least pretend to. But don't expect a bed. Beds, real, solid, mattress-having beds, were luxury items, reserved for nobles, clergy, or people who owned more than one spoon. For the rest, you get a sleeping area, which is just a generous way of saying somewhere flattish. The average medieval peasant didn't sleep on a bed. They slept on a wooden board, a pile of straw, or if times were rough, just the dirt. Not nice, sun-dried straw either. Old, scratchy, slightly damp straw that had hosted more insects than guests. It rustles when you move. It bites when you don't. And blankets? Rare. If you had one, it was probably made from wool, scratchier than your conscience and shared with at least 3 other people. If not, you slept in your clothes. All of them. Layered. With your shoes on, just in case someone decided to borrow them while you slept. You might be lucky enough to huddle near the hearth, still warm from the evening fire. But that's also where the dog sleeps, and your cousin, and probably a chicken. And no one moves once they're down, because no one wants to lose their spot and end up near the drafty corner next to the chamber pot. Speaking of which, there's no bathroom. If you need to go in the middle of the night, you're either using a cold ceramic pot by touch alone, or you're stumbling outside into the dark, stepping over sleeping bodies, and hoping not to fall face first into someone's breakfast. And then there's the noise. No insulation means you hear everything. Neighbors snoring, babies wailing, rats chewing through someone's sock 2 feet away. Sleep doesn't come easy. It's more like exhaustion-induced unconsciousness. And if you're noble, sure, you get a proper bed, maybe even curtains. But that doesn't guarantee rest. You're still cold, you're still anxious, and someone's always scheming behind those embroidered tapestries. So no, there's no bedtime luxury here. No fluffed pillows, no memory foam. Just shared air, shared misery, and a constant awareness that sleep, like comfort, is a privilege, not a right. Now let's talk about sleep itself. You might think people in the Middle Ages went to bed, fell asleep, and woke up 8 hours later feeling refreshed. You sweet, modern fool. Sleep back then didn't come in one neat package. It came in two. They called it first sleep and second sleep, a strange, broken, but entirely normal routine. You'd go to bed not long after sunset, drift off in your pile of straw, and wake up around midnight. Not because you were done sleeping, but because that's just how bodies worked back then, when circadian rhythms weren't being fried by phone screens and fluorescent lights. So, what did people do between these two sleeps? They got up. They prayed. They stoked the fire. They checked for rats. Sometimes they made things. Sometimes they made more people. Sometimes they just sat and stared into the darkness, pondering sins they hadn't yet committed. This middle-of-the-night intermission could last for an hour, sometimes more, and it wasn't peaceful. It was the hour of whispers, creaks, and shifting shadows. The time when hunger reminded you that dinner had been mostly broth, and when that weird cough your uncle had sounded a little closer. If you were religious, this was a holy hour, a chance to confess, meditate, or recite a few psalms while listening to the wind claw at your door. If you were practical, it was time to check the roof for leaks, or make sure the fire hadn't decided to consume the house. Then, after all that, back to bed. Second sleep. Shorter, lighter, and more cautious, because by then the rats were fully awake, so were the ghosts, according to your grandmother, and possibly your bladder. This wasn't insomnia, this was culture. Everyone did it, from peasants to priests to petty nobles too anxious about land taxes to ever really rest. So if you wake up at 2 a.m. tonight, staring at the ceiling, know this: you're not broken. You're just historically accurate. And speaking of second sleep, let's talk about what usually wakes you up before it. Not dreams, not hunger, not even the snoring from your uncle 3 feet away. It's the rats, the real landlords of medieval life. They don't pay rent, they don't ask permission, they don't even knock. They just show up, every night, like clockwork, dragging their twitchy little tails and endless appetite across everything you own and love. Food? Gone. Clothes? Chewed. Hair? Disturbed. Toes? Nibbled, but only gently, at first. Rats weren't a nuisance. They were a given. You didn't get rid of them. You adjusted your expectations around them. That sack of barley? Tie it up and hang it high. Your boots? Shake them before wearing, unless you want company. Your blanket? Move slowly. It rustles back. They came in squads. Not one or two. Armies. Squadrons of soft-footed chaos with no respect for your dignity, your sleep schedule, or your fear of squeaky noises in the dark. You might sleep beside 3 generations of your own family, but there's a good chance the rat population outnumbers you 2 to 1, and they're not shy. They climb. They squeak. They scratch the walls like tiny burglars rehearsing a heist. Some people tried cats. Noble effort. But cats sleep too. And when the rats outnumber the cats, well, let's just say the cats start looking nervous. The worst part? You get used to it. You stop flinching when something brushes your ankle. You stop screaming when you see 2 glowing eyes staring from the rafters. You start negotiating. Just, don't bite the baby, take the pickles, leave the rest. And in the middle of the night, when the fire's low and everyone's breathing but no one's truly asleep, you hear them. The soft gnawing, the quick scurry, the sound of shared ownership. Because in medieval homes, you weren't the resident. You were the guest. And the rats? They were always Home. If the darkness didn't keep you up, and the rats didn't, congratulations. You now qualify for the third obstacle to medieval sleep, the sounds. Because night in the Middle Ages, it wasn't silent, it was alive, with layers of noise that crept, scratched, whimpered, and howled their way through the hours. First, the dogs. Always the dogs. They barked at everything. Shadows, wind, each other, or maybe just their own existential despair. One bark sets off another, then another. Suddenly, it's a full choir of mangy paranoia, echoing across the fields, like a warning for a threat that never shows up. Then the rats, of course, still at it. Scurrying, chewing, squeaking. If you were lucky, the sounds came from the rafters. If you were unlucky, they came from under your blanket. And if you thought human noises were more comforting, think again. There's coughing. Dry, phlegmy, wet, terminal. There's groaning. Someone's back, someone's knees, someone's soul giving up. Someone has a fever. Someone's in labor. Someone's praying very quietly that the night ends with everyone still breathing. But sometimes they don't. And that's when you hear it. A low, unsteady moan from a nearby hut. A whimper. A final breath. Followed by a shout or the hurried steps of someone fetching the priest. If he's awake, sober, and not busy delivering last rites 2 doors down. Because death was never far in medieval villages. And it didn't knock politely. It slipped in, made itself at home, and left silence in its place. Even the wind joined in, rattling shutters, slipping under doors, howling like a bored banshee. Every sound carried meaning. Every creak invited a question you didn't want the answer to. So no, it wasn't peaceful. It was a haunted symphony of survival. A nighttime orchestra conducted by hunger, fear, illness, and the occasional flatulence from someone who had too much barley stew. And you? You lay still, eyes open, listening to all of it. Because in medieval nights, silence wasn't golden. It was suspicious. And amid all the noise, the cold creeps in. Enter the hearth, the beating heart of the medieval home. A small pit of fire in the center of the room, meant to keep everyone warm, cook every meal, and occasionally smoke out your entire family. It's your lifeline, your savior, and also one spark away from turning your house into a cautionary tale. There's no chimney, not in most peasant homes, just a hole in the roof, sometimes, which means the smoke has to negotiate its way up and out, often failing spectacularly. So instead of rising like in fairy tales, it spreads, low, thick, eye-stinging, lung-clogging. Your home slowly fills with what can only be described as edible fog. It curls into your blanket. It hugs the straw. It settles in your throat and reminds you that heat always comes with a price. Still, you gather around it. Everyone does. You huddle close. Not too close, unless you want to accidentally roast your foot. Children shuffle near it like tiny moths. Chickens, dogs, and that one cousin who never leaves. Everyone wants their share. And yet, while it saves you from freezing, it can also end you. One log rolled too far, one coal too dry, a gust of wind in the wrong moment, and suddenly the fire's no longer contained. Your thatched roof? Kindling. Your walls? Dry, splintered invitations. By morning, half the village might be gathered around the smouldering ruin of your house, nodding solemnly and saying things like, "Well, at least the soup was warm." And at night, as you lie half asleep, eyes burning, throat raw, heat licking your feet and smoke dancing across the ceiling, you wonder, will this fire save me, or start writing my obituary? But you don't move, you don't complain, because without the fire, there's only frostbite, shivering, and the slow realization that your breath has turned visible, and your hope has not. So yes, the hearth is sacred. It gives life. But it takes a little back every night, and then it hits you. Not a thought, not emotion. Something more urgent. It's the middle of the night. You're half asleep, wrapped in smoke-scented layers, and suddenly your bladder reminds you that barley stew is not a silent guest. Now, in the modern world, this is a minor inconvenience. In the Middle Ages, it's an adventure. There is no bathroom, That's a concept reserved for centuries in the future and people with plumbing. What you have, if you're lucky, is a cold, heavy chamber pot tucked somewhere beneath the bed, or a ceramic jug, or a very unfortunate bucket. You find it by feel, always by feel, and every touch is a gamble. Is it empty? Is it still warm? Is there something already in it? You do what must be done, quietly, carefully, pretending everyone else in the room isn't pretending not to hear you. And then, you try to go back to sleep. But now it's cold. Now the fire's died down. Now someone rolled over into your space. And the pot? Still sitting nearby, radiating shame like a judgmental potato. But maybe you're not lucky. Maybe the pot is full, or broken, or being used as a pillow by the dog. Which means you must go outside. You wrap yourself in whatever you can find. Blanket, cloak, existential dread, and tiptoe past relatives, goats, and snoring babies. You step outside into pure blackness, the kind of dark that eats sound and hope alike. The outhouse? Too far. The field? Too dangerous. You settle for the stable. It's not private, it's not clean, but at least the animals pretend not to look. And all the while, you listen. For rustling, for movement, for the sound of something that isn't you. You finish quickly. You return. You pretend none of it happened. Because in medieval life, relieving yourself wasn't a routine. It was a quest. And if you make it back without stepping in anything, waking anyone, or accidentally baptizing your only shoes, then truly, you are among the blessed. Of course, you're not sleeping alone. This is the Middle Ages. Privacy is a myth. And a bed to yourself? That's reserved for saints, royalty, or maybe the town drunk passed out in a ditch. Everyone sleeps together. Not in a weird way, just in a we're all poor and cold kind of way. You, your spouse, the kids, the baby, your cousin visiting from 3 villages over, maybe a grandmother, and definitely a chicken or two, because chickens don't like frostbite either. And occasionally a pig, if it's small and emotionally available. You all pile into the warmest corner of the room, beneath a blanket that's seen better centuries, on top of a bed that's mostly straw and hope. Limbs overlap. Someone snores. Someone kicks. Someone drools into someone else's hair. But it's warm, and that counts for a lot. Children don't have cribs. They have proximity. They sleep next to whoever won't roll over and crush them. Babies are swaddled tight, like little judgmental burritos, blinking in the dark and silently plotting when to scream next. Toddlers, they wiggle, they mutter in their sleep. They kick the dog, punch their uncle, and wake up crying because they dreamed their cabbage ran away. But no one moves them. No one tucks them into a themed blanket. You just whisper, "Shh, shh, not now," and hope the rest of the hut doesn't join the noise. Teenagers get no special treatment. They're bigger, louder, and resentful, but still part of the pile. They sleep facing the wall, sigh dramatically, and pretend they're above all this, while still using your elbow as a pillow. And yet, for all the chaos, there's comfort in it. The warmth of shared breath, the low rhythm of breathing bodies, the security of knowing someone is always right there, even if it's the goat. This isn't rest. It's survival, in group formation. Because in the medieval world, to sleep alone was to be vulnerable. But to sleep together? That was messy, loud, cramped, and oddly, the safest place to be. Of course, you're not sleeping alone. This is the Middle Ages. Privacy is a myth. And a bed to yourself? That's reserved for saints, royalty, or maybe the town drunk passed out in a ditch. Everyone sleeps together. Not in a weird way, just in a we're all poor and cold kind of way. You, your spouse, the kids, the baby, your cousin visiting from 3 villages over, maybe a grandmother, and definitely a chicken or two, because chickens don't like frostbite either. And occasionally a pig, if it's small and emotionally available. You all pile into the warmest corner of the room, beneath a blanket that's seen better centuries, on top of a bed that's mostly straw and hope. Limbs overlap. Someone snores. Someone kicks. Someone drools into someone else's hair. But it's warm, and that counts for a lot. Children don't have cribs. They have proximity. They sleep next to whoever won't roll over and crush them. Babies are swaddled tight, like little judgmental burritos, blinking in the dark and silently plotting when to scream next. Toddlers, they wiggle, they mutter in their sleep. They kick the dog, punch their uncle, and wake up crying because they dreamed their cabbage ran away. But no one moves them. No one tucks them into a themed blanket. You just whisper, "Shh, shh, not now," and hope the rest of the hut doesn't join the noise. Teenagers get no special treatment. They're bigger, louder, and resentful, but still part of the pile. They sleep facing the wall, sigh dramatically, and pretend they're above all this, while still using your elbow as a pillow. And yet, for all the chaos, there's comfort in it. The warmth of shared breath, the low rhythm of breathing bodies, the security of knowing someone is always right there, even if it's the goat. This isn't rest. It's survival, in group formation. Because in the medieval world, to sleep alone was to be vulnerable. But to sleep together? That was messy, loud, cramped, and oddly, the safest place to be. But maybe you're thinking, well, sure, the peasants had it rough, but the nobles, they must have slept like royalty. Ah, you sweet, naive dreamer. Let's step into the bedchamber of the medieval elite. Yes, there's a bed, a real one, tall, carved, draped in heavy curtains and stuffed with something that might have once been feathers. It creaks like an old hymn, and smells faintly of incense, mildew, and inherited trauma. But don't let the silks fool you. Comfort is an illusion. The bed curtains? Not romantic. They're wind blockers, because castles are cold, very cold, made of stone, and no insulation cold. And while the tapestries look nice, they do very little to stop the breeze sneaking in through the arrow slits. You're wearing a nightgown made of linen, maybe fur-lined if you're lucky, and you're sleeping beside a spouse chosen for their land, not their warmth. And just outside the chamber, servants, guards, spies, cousins, all whispering, all listening, all possibly plotting. Because if you're a noble, sleep isn't peace. It's strategy. You dream of taxes unpaid, borders unguarded, a cousin who smiled too long at your chalice during dinner. You dream of arranged marriages gone wrong, of angry bishops, of peasants thinking too loudly about freedom. You don't snore, you scheme. Even your mattress has politics. Was it gifted? Was it taxed? Was it blessed by someone important or stitched by someone cursed? And if you're the lord of the manor, you lie there half awake, hand on your dagger, wondering if tonight's the night someone tries to advance the family line without you in it. Meanwhile, the wind howls, the fire sputters, the mice hold a tiny masquerade under your bed. So no, nobles didn't sleep easy. They just did it with better sheets and significantly more anxiety. Because in feudal life, no one slept well. Not the poor, not the rich, not even the ones with curtains. Now, if you thought a regular medieval night was bad, try being sick during one. Illness was practically a roommate in the Middle Ages. Everyone had something, a cough, a fever, a rash that looked suspicious and felt worse. And the night, that's when it all got louder. You lie there, under a blanket that smells like damp wool and lost hope, listening to your lungs try to escape your body. Each breath is a gamble. Will it wheeze? Will it rattle? Will it wake the baby, the goat, or the priest next door? If you have a fever, sleep becomes hallucination. You sweat through your tunic. You whisper nonsense. You call out for your dead aunt who's somehow making soup in the corner. Your family doesn't sleep either. They hover. They whisper prayers. They argue in low voices about whether to send for the healer or just wait and see. The healer, by the way, is a man with a stick, some herbs, and the unshakable confidence of someone who once read half a scroll. He recommends bleeding, warm ale, or maybe tying garlic to your ankle, just in case. Meanwhile, your cough gets worse. Someone lights a candle. Someone checks your forehead. Someone sighs. Because they've seen this before. Across the village, you can hear it too. Another hut, another moan, another prayer. Sometimes, a sudden silence that lasts too long. The dying don't always go quietly. Sometimes they gasp. Sometimes they scream. Sometimes they confess every sin they've ever considered. just to be sure. And in the morning, if you're still breathing, people call it a miracle. If not, they call the priest. And then they call the neighbors to help carry the body. Because in medieval nights, illness didn't wait for morning. It didn't knock. It moved through the dark like smoke, unseen but everywhere. So if someone was sick in your house, sleep wasn't just interrupted. It was cancelled, but not everyone got to lie awake in bed, battling rats, fever dreams, or existential dread. Some had to stay up on purpose. Enter the night watchman, the unlucky soul tasked with guarding the village, the manor, or just making sure the fire didn't consume half the hamlet before sunrise. Sounds noble, right? It wasn't. It was cold. It was thankless. And most of the time, it was terrifying. You're out there with nothing but a torch, a wooden stick, and the faint hope that nothing happens on your shift. There's no armor, no backup, just a hood, some questionable boots, and the creeping suspicion that something is always watching from the tree line. Your duties? Walk around. Listen for trouble. Keep the fire from dying or spreading. Check that the animals haven't escaped, that the children haven't wandered off, and that the ale doesn't mysteriously evaporate from the Lord's cellar overnight. But mostly, you just listen to creaking roofs, to coughing neighbors, to far-off howls that may or may not be wolves, or worse, a very bored spirit. You're not protecting people from organized crime. You're just making sure drunk uncles don't fall into wells, or that nobody accidentally wanders into the river thinking it's the outhouse. And while you're out there, everyone else is asleep, or pretending to be, snuggled beside the fire, surrounded by family and domestic poultry. You're staring into darkness, trying not to imagine how many ghosts are legally allowed to appear per night. There's no rotation schedule, no overtime, no coffee. Just you, the cold, and the eternal joy of hearing something rustle just out of sight. And if you make it to morning without freezing, falling, or discovering a new form of supernatural trauma, well done. No one will thank you. But they also won't be on fire. Which, in medieval standards, means you did a great job. Of course, when you live in the dark, cold, rat-infested unknown, eventually, your thoughts drift somewhere even colder, the supernatural. Because for medieval folks, night wasn't just night. It was when the veil thinned, when the devils crept in, when the things no one wanted to name did a little wandering. So what did people do? They prayed. A lot. Not the peaceful, serene bedtime prayers we know now. These were whispered, desperate, repetitive, like trying to hold the door shut with your words. You'd recite the Lord's Prayer, maybe backwards if you were really nervous. You'd murmur names of saints like passwords. Some even scratched crosses into walls, doors, or bedposts with bits of charcoal. And if you were especially concerned, out came the garlic. Not for cooking, who had enough to waste, but to hang near the door, the window, or your sleeping baby. Some believed it kept spirits away. Others believed it just confused them. You might also knock on wood, literally before blowing out the candle, or spit 3 times over your shoulder, or sleep with iron under your straw mattress, which didn't help your back, but hopefully helped your soul. And if someone had been acting strange, talking to shadows, staring too long at chickens, you might whisper about them to the priest, just in case. Exorcisms weren't common, but they weren't unheard of either. Bad dreams? Possession. Sudden illness? Cursed. Coughing too much at night? Demonic air, best cured with prayer, herbs, and a stern talking to from someone in robes. Even kids got in on it. They were taught rhymes and chants to ward off nighttime visitors, both visible and otherwise. God bless the house, God bless the bed, and God help whatever was lurking under it. Because in medieval minds, night wasn't empty. It was crowded, with memories, monsters, and maybe a sin or two you forgot to confess. So yes, they prayed. Not just for peace, but for protection. Now, if you've made it this far into the medieval night, you might wonder, was there romance? Let's be clear. Yes, sex existed in the Middle Ages, but it wasn't candlelit poetry and stolen glances beneath the stars. It was logistical, quiet, fast, and preferably unwitnessed by your grandmother sleeping 3 feet away. Privacy was rare. Beds were shared. Curtains, if you had them, were meant for blocking drafts, not discretion. So unless you were nobility, or very, very lucky, you did what you could, when you could, while pretending the family goat wasn't making uncomfortable eye contact. And even when circumstances aligned, the risks were considerable. First, there's the church. Sex was sacred, regulated, monitored from the pulpit. You didn't just roll over and go for it. There were rules, positions, times of year, days of the week. Too much enthusiasm? Sin. Wrong mood? Sin. During Lent? Absolutely not. Married couples were expected to be dutiful, modest, and extremely boring. Passion was for sinners, or poets, or people soon to be excommunicated. Then there's the issue of pregnancy. Birth control? Primitive at best, dangerous at worst. And pregnancy meant childbirth, which was its own medieval dice roll. Romantic evenings could lead to 9 months of anxiety, followed by either a christening or a funeral. Infidelity? Public shame. Possible exile. In some places, death. Even suspicion could ruin your standing, your marriage, or your face, depending on who found out and how sharp their knife was. And if you were caught in the act, say by your in-laws, your lord, or the night watchman, it wasn't a scandal, it was evidence. Of sin, of rebellion, of very poor timing. So yes, sex happened, but rarely with comfort, never without consequence, and often with at least one eye open for rats, priests, or your spouse's relatives. Because in the Middle Ages, even intimacy had to follow the rules. And breaking them didn't just ruin your night, it could end it. And finally, there's the one thing no one wants to think about before bed. But in the Middle Ages, everyone had to. Death. Quiet, casual, occasionally inconvenient, nighttime death was a regular part of medieval life. People didn't always die in battle or from grand illnesses. Sometimes they just didn't wake up. A fever went too high. A cough turned into something worse. A child stopped breathing. An elder didn't stir at dawn. And in one-room homes, with 10 people to a bed and half a barnyard for company, you knew immediately. Someone didn't move. Someone felt cold. Someone stopped making noise. There was no doctor to call, no emergency candle to light, just stillness, then whispers, then maybe a tear, maybe not, because grief was a luxury and morning chores still needed doing. The priest would be summoned. A prayer said. A neighbor fetched to help carry the body out, sometimes before breakfast. If you were noble, death came with ritual, bells, candles, Latin. If you were poor, it came with a shovel, a patch of dirt, and someone muttering, "He always had that cough." Children learned young what death looked like, what it smelled like, how fast it could go from someone breathing beside you to someone needing to be moved. And people accepted it, not because they were numb, but because resisting didn't help. Death was not a stranger. It was part of the night. It walked between straw beds and over creaky floorboards. Sometimes it took the sick, sometimes the strong, sometimes just whoever was next. And every morning, people woke with the quiet habit of checking. Who's still here? Who's still breathing? Who made it through another night? Because in the medieval world, you didn't fear death. You expected it, especially after dark. And finally, there's the one thing no one wants to think about before bed. But in the Middle Ages, everyone had to. Death. Quiet, casual, occasionally inconvenient, nighttime death was a regular part of medieval life. People didn't always die in battle or from grand illnesses. Sometimes they just didn't wake up. A fever went too high. A cough turned into something worse. A child stopped breathing. An elder didn't stir at dawn. And in one-room homes, with 10 people to a bed and half a barnyard for company, you knew immediately. Someone didn't move. Someone felt cold. Someone stopped making noise. There was no doctor to call, no emergency candle to light, just stillness, then whispers, then maybe a tear, maybe not, because grief was a luxury and morning chores still needed doing. The priest would be summoned. A prayer said. A neighbor fetched to help carry the body out, sometimes before breakfast. If you were noble, death came with ritual. Bells, candles, Latin. If you were poor, it came with a shovel, a patch of dirt, and someone muttering, "He always had that cough." Children learned young what death looked like, what it smelled like, how fast it could go from someone breathing beside you to someone needing to be moved. And people accepted it, not because they were numb, but because resisting didn't help. Death was not a stranger. It was part of the night. It walked between straw beds and over creaky floorboards. Sometimes it took the sick, sometimes the strong, sometimes just whoever was next. And every morning, people woke with the quiet habit of checking. Who's still here? Who's still breathing? Who made it through another night? Because in the medieval world, you didn't fear death. You expected it, especially after dark. I wasn't born a hero. I didn't dream of battlefields or armor or honor. When I was little, I just wanted to wear a pretty kimono like my mother's, maybe play with my sisters in the rice fields, maybe grow old quietly. I was born in Echigo, a cold, wind-bitten province where the bamboo groans in the winter like it's trying to break itself free. My family was samurai. Well, what was left of one. We used to have land, retainers, and stories worth telling. Then came war. Then came hunger. Then came silence. My father was a samurai without a lord, and my mother was a woman with too many mouths to feed and not enough rice. They never meant to raise a warrior. Girls were meant to pour tea and speak softly, not carry blades or bleed for a name, but life doesn't always care what's meant to be. I was the second daughter, somewhere between useful and invisible. My older sister was the heir, my younger sister was the baby. I was spare, and maybe that's why I wandered. Climbed trees, wrestled in the dirt, carved sticks into swords. I remember sneaking into the corner of the yard, watching my father train my brother. I memorized every stance, every shout, every fall. No one ever offered to teach me, so I taught myself. I wrapped bandages around my hands, swung at the shadows, and fell over more times than I could count. My brother laughed. My mother scolded me. But one day, when I knocked the wind out of my cousin with a wooden staff, my father stopped laughing. The next morning, he handed me a dull training blade, said nothing, just nodded. That was the moment I stopped being a girl who played with swords and started becoming something else. Not a soldier, not a legend, just a person trying to survive a world that didn't expect much from her and punished her for offering more. I didn't choose this path because I was brave. I chose it because I was tired of being afraid. And when I wrapped my fingers around that hilt for the first time, I didn't feel powerful. I felt seen. And I knew I would never give that up. People like to think female warriors in Japan were just legends, ghosts in poetry, pretty names on scrolls. But I lived it, and I can tell you this. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't epic. It was survival. You see, long before I was born, before my mother, or her mother, or hers, women in samurai families were trained to fight. Not for honor, not for glory, but because there was simply no other choice. The wars didn't care who you were. The bandits didn't knock on the door and ask for the men. If the men were gone, and they often were, it was the women who had to defend the home, the food, the children, the rice, the name. We were called Onabugeisha, women of war. Not as famous as the men, not as respected either. But we were there, always on the edge of the scroll, barely mentioned, never forgotten by those who saw us. Our training wasn't the kind you read about in storybooks. No rows of soldiers in perfect sync, no chanting or parades. My training was in the courtyard, with dirt underfoot, wind in my face, and my father barking corrections between swigs of old sake. He taught me to use the naginata, a polearm with a curved blade, almost as tall as I was back then. It was ideal for women, they said. Long reach, good for defense, could keep an attacker at bay. But it was heavy, awkward. It bruised my shoulders, split my palms. Still, I practiced, day after day, because I had to. I wasn't the only one. Other girls in the village, some daughters of minor samurai, some wives of traveling merchants, learned in secret. We didn't talk about it. We didn't boast. We shared bruises like secrets, whispered tips to each other between chores and market trips. Keep your feet wide. Don't hesitate when you strike. Aim for the soft parts. We weren't soldiers. We were daughters, sisters, wives, but we were preparing, not for war necessarily, but for the moments when no one else would save us. There were stories we whispered at night, of Tomoe Gozen, the legendary warrior woman who fought beside Lord Kiso Yoshinaka in the Genpei War. Centuries ago, they said she was beautiful, but fierce. They always say that, don't they? That she was as graceful as a blossom, but deadly as a storm. I never cared about that part. I just wanted to know how she kept fighting when the battlefield turned to mud and her comrades died around her. We knew stories like hers weren't fantasy. They just weren't convenient for men to remember. Later, we heard of Nakano Takeko, who led a unit of women in the Boshin War. They say she tied a sash around her waist with her name and family written on it, so her body could be returned home if she fell. When she was shot in the chest, she asked her sister to behead her, so the enemy wouldn't take her head as a trophy. That was only a few decades ago, long after Tomoe, long before me, long enough for most people to pretend it never happened. But I remembered. I still do, because these women weren't just myths. They were the blood in our veins, the echo in our footfalls, the reason we picked up a blade and didn't let go. The truth is, being a female warrior wasn't rare in Japan's history. It was just inconvenient for the people who wrote it down. As the country changed, as the Tokugawa shogunate took power and peace settled over the land, or at least that's what the officials claimed, they no longer needed women who fought. They needed women who bowed, who obeyed, who produced sons and folded laundry, and never raised their voices, let alone a weapon. So our stories faded. Our names were scratched out of the scrolls, replaced with paintings of tea ceremonies and silk fans. The onobugeisha were buried beneath layers of etiquette and expectations. But we never disappeared. We just got quieter, and our weapons were hidden under floorboards, not dreams. Even in my time, long after the last war anyone talks about, there were still those of us who learned. Fathers who trained their daughters in secret. Mothers who passed on old forms disguised as dance. We were told to act proper, dress feminine, smile politely, but we remembered how to move, how to breathe, how to strike. My father used to say, "History forgets what it fears, and nothing scares men more than a woman who doesn't need them to survive." At first, I thought he meant it as a compliment. Later, I realized it was a warning. So when people now ask if female samurai were real, I smile, not because I'm proud, not because I want to explain, but because the truth doesn't need to shout. It's still here, in calloused hands, in scars that don't fade, in the quiet way we carry ourselves through the world. We weren't raised to be warriors. We became them when the world gave us no other choice. And no matter how many centuries try to paint us as flowers, we remember. We were steel. We were fire. We were honor bugeisha. You can train all you want. Practice the forms. Swing until your arms burn. But it isn't until you hear another woman's name whispered like a prayer, like a warning, that you realize you're not the first, and you won't be the last. My father told me once, over a fire and a chipped rice bowl, about Tomoe Gozen. He said her name like it belonged to a ghost, but not one to fear, one to respect. She fought like 100 men, he said, but smarter. He didn't tell me to become her, just to remember her. And I did. Tomoe wasn't a myth. She lived during the Genpei War, over 700 years ago, a war that cracked Japan into new shapes. She was said to be the right hand of Kiso Yoshinaka, a general who rebelled against his own clan. They said she rode into battle in full armor, long hair flying, wielding a blade taller than most men's pride. One record claimed she decapitated a seasoned warrior on horseback, then calmly rejoined the fight. Another said she refused to run, even when the tide turned, when Yoshinaka begged her to flee so he could die alone. They say she obeyed, reluctantly. Some think she vanished into the mountains. Others believe she became a nun. A few swear she died in battle. I don't know what's true. But this, I believe, she existed, because we needed her to, and because men don't make up women who win. Years later, there was Hangaku Gozen, another Onna bugeisha from the late 12th century. When her clan rose in rebellion, She led 3,000 soldiers in defense of a castle. Arrows rained down like judgment. She stood her ground, fought until she was wounded and captured. The records say she impressed her enemies so much they didn't execute her. She was too strong to be erased. They didn't write poems about her beauty, just her defiance. That, to me, is rarer, but the one who haunts me most is Nakano Takeko. She wasn't from ancient times. She lived barely a few generations before me, and she didn't wait for permission to fight. She raised her own army. In 1868, during the Boshin War, the emperor's forces were sweeping through the north. Men were dying, boys were being conscripted. But Takeko gathered women, sisters, daughters, wives, and formed the Joshitai, an all-female unit. They weren't ornamental, they weren't symbolic, they were trained, focused. Angry, Takeko fought with a naginata, led from the front. She wrote her name and her village on a piece of cloth and tied it to her body, so if she fell, someone would know who she was and where to return her bones. And she did fall, shot in the chest during battle. With her last strength, she turned to her sister and begged to be beheaded, so the enemy wouldn't steal her head like a trophy. Her sister obeyed. They buried her near a temple, planted trees nearby. Years later, locals built a stone monument. Every year, in Aizu, little girls dress in white and red, carry mock naginata, and march in her honor. They call her a hero now, but she didn't die for glory. She died because no one else would protect her home. These women, Tomoe, Hangaku, Takeko, they were not the only ones. Just the ones history failed to fully erase. There were others, so many unnamed, women who fought beside their husbands, daughters who held swords while their fathers were bleeding, mothers who killed to protect their children, then went back to cooking rice. Not every story made it to the scrolls. Most never left the mouths of those who witnessed them. I once met a woman in my village, old as winter and just as quiet. Her hands were stiff, her back bent like a branch after too much snow. She once told me, without blinking, that she had stabbed a thief through the ribs with a chopstick when she was 16. Didn't scream, didn't cry, just cleaned the floor, burned the cloth, and kept the rice warm. Was she a warrior? I say yes, because to be a warrior wasn't always about battlefields and banners. It was about what you defended, and how far you were willing to go to keep it safe. These women lived in a world that didn't make space for them, so they carved it out themselves, in scars, in silence, in refusal. And though their names faded, their legacy didn't. You can feel it in the way some women walk, with steady shoulders, like they remember armor. You can hear it in the lullabies passed from grandmothers to daughters, songs that sound sweet but carry warning like blade edges. My story is not as grand as theirs. I didn't lead an army. I didn't defy an emperor. I didn't die in a blaze of arrows, but I held the blade. I stood my ground. I learned their names and whispered them before sleep, so I wouldn't forget who I came from. People like to imagine warrior women as fierce and glamorous, silhouetted against the sunrise, wind catching in their hair, a sword in one hand, justice in the other. Let me ruin that image for you. Most days, I didn't feel like a warrior. I felt like a tired housekeeper with sore shoulders and too much laundry. Because that's what we were. Fighters, sure, but only when life allowed it, and life rarely did. You woke up early, always, no matter the season. The cold in Echigo was unkind. It bit through the paper walls and settled in your bones. We didn't sleep on beds. We slept on straw mats, often damp, sometimes frozen stiff. I wrapped my legs in rags before bed, just to keep the blood moving. First came chores, hauling water, chopping wood, cooking rice. If you were lucky, the fire pit lit on the first try. If not, you coughed through smoke for half an hour. No one praised you for this. It was expected. You were a woman. You worked. That was the order of things. Then came sewing, washing, feeding chickens or fixing roof tiles or carrying buckets of compost down to the field. And yes, sometimes training, but only if there was time. Only if the children weren't sick. Only if the rice wasn't burning. Training was squeezed in between responsibility. A few strikes before the rice boiled. A kata while waiting for the miso soup to simmer. Armor? I didn't wear armor most days. It was too heavy, too expensive. Mine was patched together, hand-me-down pieces from my father's youth, leather hardened with oil and time. The shoulder guards pinched. The chest plate never fit right. I wrapped linen under everything to stop the chafing. It only helped a little. Weapons? My naginata was older than I was. The blade had nicks I couldn't sharpen out. The pole had been cracked and bound with string. But it worked. Mostly. Food? Sparse. We didn't eat like nobles. No banquets. No endless trays of fish and sake. A bowl of rice. Maybe pickled radish. If we were lucky, dried fish or stewed roots. Protein came from effort, hunting, trapping, bargaining, and in lean months, from hope. Cleanliness? That's a modern fantasy. I washed maybe twice a week. If water was available and not frozen solid, you'd be amazed how much dirt you can learn to ignore. You stop noticing the smell after a while. You start recognizing others by theirs. Privacy? Another myth. We lived crowded. Rooms were shared. Conversations were overheard. Emotions were swallowed. I learned to cry in silence. Or not at all. Clothing? Simple, functional, usually mended by hand. I had one good kimono for special occasions. Patched, faded, but respected. The rest were working clothes. Layered in winter, soaked in sweat come summer. Bloodstains were part of the fabric. You learn not to ask whose. Love? Complicated. I was once courted by a rice merchant's son. He brought me plums. I brought him bruises. We didn't last. Most men didn't want a woman who could outfight them, and I didn't want one who couldn't stand beside me. Children? Some had them. Some lost them. Some, like me, never did. Not by choice, just by chance. I helped raise others when needed. Cleaned scraped knees. Wiped noses. Told bedtime stories with hidden lessons. Hold your stance. Don't flinch. Look them in the eye. Fear? Always there. Not of war, but of everything in between. Illness. Fire. Bandits. Famine. Wordless. Creeping losses that no sword could parry. I feared losing people more than losing battles, because I could fight the latter, not the former. Respect? That depended. Some men admired me, quietly. Others mocked me, loudly. A few tried to test me. They walked away limping, but the most common response was confusion. I didn't fit their world. I made them uncomfortable. That was its own kind of power. Faith? Yes. Not in gods. In repetition. In calluses. In the weight of a weapon that felt like an extension of my body. In the way my breath steadied when everything else spun. I prayed through movement. Through remembering. Through staying ready. I once heard a visitor say, "A warrior's life must be exciting." I laughed. I was ankle-deep in pig manure at the time. The truth is, 90% of it is maintenance. The other 10% is blood. There was no grand music, no war drums, no final speeches, just the creak of old armor, the stink of effort, and the thud of footwork on packed earth. And when things got quiet again, I went back to kneading rice cakes like nothing happened. That's what no one tells you. Being a warrior wasn't an escape from being a woman. It was something you added on top. You still had to clean, serve, bear, bury. You just did it while carrying a blade. And yes, there were days I questioned it. Days I wanted soft things. A silk robe. A man who didn't flinch at my calluses. A life where I didn't have to look over my shoulder. But when I stood in the yard at sunset, blade in hand, sweat on my back, and the chickens finally quiet, there was a calm that settled into my ribs. A stillness. A kind of truth. I wasn't made for glory. I wasn't chasing legend. I was surviving, honestly, stubbornly, and with as much grace as mud and bruises would allow. That's how we lived. Not like heroes, like women, who knew how to fight, and still had to make dinner. People think the fight is the hard part. It's not. The hard part is before the fight. The waiting, the breathing, the moment when your hands sweat but your mouth goes dry, and your thoughts scream louder than any war cry. But I'll tell you how we fought. Not from the poems, not from the plays, from memory, from calluses, from bruises I carried for weeks after. We weren't trained for parades. Our battles didn't happen in wide-open fields with banners waving. They happened in narrow alleys, muddy courtyards, doorways barely wide enough to swing. We fought in kimonos stained with ash, with children screaming 2 rooms away, with fire close enough to taste. Our weapon of choice was the naginata, a polearm with a curved blade, balanced and brutal. Not because it was elegant, but because it worked. It gave us reach, distance, the chance to keep someone away, even if they were stronger, especially if they were stronger. I learned the weight of it first. It wasn't light. It pulled at your shoulders. It punished poor form. My wrists ached for weeks. But once I got used to the rhythm, it became an extension of me. Left foot forward, circle block, drop low, cut upward, like you're slicing open a lie. When it broke, and it did break, I used a short blade, a tanto, hidden in my sleeve. Sometimes a kitchen knife, sometimes a sharpened farming tool. You used what you had. You didn't wait for perfect. We didn't yell when we struck. We breathed. Hard. Sharp. A guttural exhale like spitting out fear. Because if you scream in real fights, you give away your breath. You lose rhythm. You lose control. Most of the time, we didn't fight to kill. We fought to stop, to escape, to outlast. But when we had to kill, we did it fast. Aim for the thigh, where the artery runs. One slice, pull back, pivot, or the neck, if you're sure. But never hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed, and never look away after. Look, let the image settle, so you don't freeze next time, because there's always a next time. People think battle is loud, and sometimes it is. But the scariest moments are quiet. The pause right after a blow lands, the way everything slows before it speeds up again, the sound of a blade leaving skin. The gasp, the fall, that silence. It stays with you. The first time I fought, really fought, was during a raid. Bandits, desperate, dirty, eyes wild with hunger. My brother wasn't home. My father was injured. So it was me, just me and my naginata. I didn't plan to kill. I meant to scare. But he rushed me. Too fast. I reacted. The blade caught his collarbone. He fell, twitched, then stilled. I stood there shaking. Not with regret, just with the weight of what it meant. That I could end someone. That I had to. After that, I didn't train to feel powerful. I trained to feel prepared. There's a difference. Power feeds the ego. Preparation keeps you breathing. Fighting wasn't daily, but it was always possible. There were feuds, disputes over land or water. Some men didn't like being told no. Sometimes strangers showed up drunk and angry. Sometimes people you trusted turned violent. So I kept a blade near the door, another in the kitchen, one under the floorboard, just in case. Not because I wanted a fight, but because I refused to be caught unready. The mind plays tricks before battle. You start thinking of everything you could lose. Your family, your face, your name. But once it starts, once the first move is made, it's muscle, instinct. Drill and repeat. You move like breath. You forget your name. You become only the next strike. And when it ends, you remember. Too much. The shaking, the blood, the smell. Gods, the smell. No one tells you how iron really stinks. How it sticks in your nostrils and lingers on your hands no matter how many times you wash. Or the sound of someone dying. It's not a scream. It's not poetic. It's wet. Small. Like a kettle sputtering at the end of a boil. I fought women too. Not just men. Women defending their homes. Women who were desperate, cornered, furious. That was harder, because you saw yourself in them. We didn't always survive clean. I have scars I never show. One on my ribs from a blade that slipped under my guard. One on my thigh from a fight I don't even remember. Just woke up bleeding. Pain became background noise. You learned to breathe around it. After battles, you didn't celebrate. You cleaned, washed the blade, hid the body, sewed torn fabric, said little, slept badly, ate what was left, if anything. Some men called us unnatural, said we were wrong to fight, but none of them were there when we had to choose between screaming or swinging, between submission or survival. I once had a priest tell me I was unclean for taking a life. I asked if the man who tried to burn our storehouse was cleaner. He had no answer. So, yes, we fought, but not like the stories. No perfect strikes, no cherry blossoms falling, no victory speeches, just survival, just necessity, just women who knew that strength wasn't loud, and fear didn't mean failure. We weren't trained for glory. We were trained because no one else was coming. And when the time came, we fought like our names were on the line, because they were, even if no one bothered to write them down. There was a time I thought that fighting would be enough, that if I trained hard enough, defended well enough, survived long enough, someone would remember, that the names of women like me would be carved beside the names of men. I was wrong. The truth is, it's not the battlefield that erases us. It's what happens after. We fought. That part is real. I've bled enough to know it. We trained in the dark corners of our courtyards, cut calluses into our palms, stood between homes and danger. Some of us led troops, some defended villages, some just fought for our lives. But when the swords were sheathed and the stories were written, we vanished. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. History doesn't erase people like a blade. It sands them down, slowly, until all that's left is suggestion, a vague outline, a footnote, a myth. It began, I think, when peace returned. When the wars quieted, the generals put down their maps, and the shogunate brought order. Men no longer needed women who fought. They needed women who stayed quiet, who folded laundry, who bore sons. Women who carried swords made people nervous in times of peace. We were reminders of chaos, of blood, of a time they wanted to forget, so they forgot us too. They called it civilization. They called it progress. But for us, it felt like a funeral held in silence. The scrolls, the ones kept by male scholars and monks, began to change. They recorded battles, yes, victories, lineages, treaties, but not us. They erased our names and wrote about tea ceremonies. They replaced our blades with silk fans. And when they couldn't erase us completely, they turned us into curiosities. A fierce maiden here, a mystical heroine there. Not people, just ornaments, stories for campfires. Even the language turned against us. Onobugeisha became a rare word, almost impolite to say out loud, like we were a mistake, best not repeated. Then came the Confucian ideals, imported and enforced. Men above women, silence above expression, duty above self. A woman's virtue was in obedience, not courage. So what do you do with a woman who has both? You rewrite her. You dress her in softer robes. You remove her sword. You say she died young, or better, never existed. And the worst part? We let it happen, not because we were weak, but because we were tired. Tired of explaining, tired of defending our right to exist, tired of living between admiration and suspicion. We grew older. We folded our weapons into boxes beneath the floor. We told our daughters not to be loud, not because we believed the silence was better, but because we wanted them to survive. And in doing so, we became ghosts in our own stories. Some of us tried to speak, quietly, in corners. I remember an elder, eyes clouded, voice steady, who used to trace the Naginata form with her cane, just once, before bed. She never said a word, but I knew what it meant. She remembered. She just didn't trust the world to remember with her. The men didn't hate us, exactly. They simply preferred the version of us they could control. Pretty, soft-spoken, loyal, a woman with a sword, complicated things. And history doesn't like things that complicate its heroes, so they wrote around us, wrote through us, wrote over us. Even when we did everything they asked, bled, fought, stayed, we were always one edit away from being forgotten. You might ask, why didn't we record our own stories? Some did, a few diaries, letters, woodblock prints, but they were small, fragile, easily lost in fire, flood, or carelessness. And besides, our lives didn't feel like history. They felt like work, laundry and bruises, rice and sweat, not the kind of things that make it into legend. But let me tell you this. Every time a girl picks up a broom and pretends it's a blade, every time a woman stands her ground when no one else will, every time someone whispers a name like Tomoe or Takeko and feels something stir, we're remembered, not by the books, by the blood. And maybe that's enough. Still, it hurts. To know I could have died 100 ways and still not been written down. That I could have saved someone's life and still be called wife of a farmer in a record kept by a man who never held a blade. But I don't need a statue. I don't need a shrine. I need you, whoever you are, wherever you sit reading this. to know we existed, that we fought, that we mattered, and that history didn't forget us because we weren't brave. It forgot us because we were inconvenient. But truth has a way of surviving, buried, bruised, but breathing, just like us. I never thought anyone would remember us. Not really. Not after so many years of silence, so many generations told to forget, so many swords hung up for the last time. But every now and then, I see something. A flicker, a fragment, a ghost that refuses to vanish. The first time it happened, I was older, my hair already grey, my hands not what they used to be. I had travelled to Aizu for supplies, a simple errand, but as I passed through the village square, I heard drums, soft, steady, and saw girls, dozens of them. Young, maybe 8, maybe 10, dressed in white and red, hair tied back, holding mock naginata made of wood. They were marching, not like soldiers, like memory. I stopped in my tracks, watched them circle the shrine steps in rhythm, watched their mothers smile and clap and adjust their sleeves. No one bowed their heads, no one looked ashamed, and at the centre of it all stood a stone, worn, weather-stained, but standing proud, carved into it, a name. Nakano Takeko. I hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in years, maybe not since my father's time, but here, in this town where she once bled into the soil, they remembered. Every year during the Aizu Autumn Festival, they honour her, not with sermons, not with lectures, but with movement, with children, with colour. It broke something open in me, quietly, like a wound I didn't know was still sore. We don't get monuments like men do, but sometimes a monument is a girl gripping a wooden blade like it's truth. Elsewhere, too, I've seen traces, faint, but real. There's a print I once saw in Kyoto, behind dusty glass in a shop too small for its history, a woodblock image of a woman in full armour. Chin raised, eyes sharp, no name written, no title, but the stance? I recognised it. A guard form we practised as girls, forgotten by most, but not by me. Even the museums, those great houses of curated memory, have begun to whisper our names again. In Tokyo, I once stood before a glass case holding a naginata, said to belong to a noblewoman. The placard was vague, attributed to female warrior, late Edo period. That's all. No certainty, no detail, but the blade was real. The wear on the grip told me she trained with it, not posed, not for show. There's something sacred about knowing a stranger's hand once held what you hold now. In smaller villages, you'll find old family shrines, where swords are wrapped in silk and buried behind paper walls. Some are rusted, others shine from care. When asked, the elders say, "It belonged to my grandmother's aunt," or "a woman in our line who helped defend the house." They say it softly, like it might vanish if spoken too loud. It won't. In the modern world, people write books now, paint pictures, even make plays and films. Some get it wrong. They dress us in makeup and let us twirl for the camera. They forget the blood, the bruises, the chores we still had to finish after the fighting was done. But some get it right, or at least they try. And the trying matters. They call us icons now, symbols of strength, feminist before feminism. I don't know about all that. All I know is we were tired, but we didn't stop. We were told to be soft, and we weren't. We were warned to be quiet, and we weren't. And now, when a woman raises her voice, or learns a martial art, or refuses to shrink herself, somewhere, the echo of us lingers. There are women today who train with naginata not for war, but for sport, for ritual, for memory. In high school gyms and polished dojos, they move in silence, bow before and after practice. Respect the weapon, respect the self. They don't call themselves warriors, but they are, in their own way. Every time they grip the shaft with both hands and step forward, they move like we did, with intent, with balance, with inheritance. Even outside Japan, our image has begun to surface, on murals, on posters, in tattoos on shoulders of women I'll never meet. They may not know our full names, but they feel something when they see us, something sharp, something true. In Mexico, I heard of a girl who dressed as Tomoe Gozen for a costume festival. She didn't get every detail right, but she walked like she understood, and maybe that's enough. Sometimes, I wonder if this is what legacy really is. Not fame, not stories carved in stone, but fragments, scattered, carried from one woman's hands to another, passed like a secret, like a seed, and maybe we were never meant to be remembered in full. Maybe the world wasn't ready for us then. Maybe it's only just beginning to be ready now. I don't need every child to know my name. I just hope that somewhere, one girl sees a blade, not as a weapon, but as permission, to be strong, to be strange, to be remembered, not as an exception, but as part of something older, wilder, and beautifully unfinished. People want stories to have heroes. They want clean lines, a brave warrior, a noble cause, a clear victory. But life, real life, doesn't fit those lines, and neither did we. I never called myself a hero. None of the women I knew ever did. We weren't fighting for glory. We were fighting because no one else would. We were women, wives, daughters, sisters, rice cookers, clothes menders, field workers. And when it came down to it, we became something more. Not because we wanted to, but because we had to. I've never ridden into battle under a banner. I've never stood atop a pile of enemies or given a rousing speech. I've held a blade with shaking hands, yes, but I've also scrubbed blood out of my kimono, then boiled rice for someone who would never know. Does that sound like a hero? I once fought off a thief who tried to take our food. He was desperate. I was angrier. I hit him with a rice paddle first, then the short blade I kept hidden. I cut his arm. He ran. I cried after. Not because I was scared, because I didn't want to hurt him, because I knew that, in another life, it could have been me. That's the part no one writes down. The shame, the guilt, the aching knees and smoke in the eyes, and the way fear sits in your stomach for days, long after the danger has passed. We weren't statues. We weren't symbols. We were people with back pain and bad tempers and moments of doubt. We cursed. We bled during training and still had to hang laundry. We got blisters in our boots and bites from mosquitoes that didn't care we could wield a naginata. Some of us loved women. Some of us loved no one. Some married for duty, others for safety, some for foolish hope. Most of us had our hearts broken more often than our armor. I remember one woman, Misaki, strong as iron, knew how to break a spear with her elbow, but she couldn't break her own mother's disappointment. No matter how many men she'd bested, her name was still whispered behind closed doors, not as a warrior, as the one who never married. We were too much for some, too loud, too stubborn, too sharp in a world that asked women to be smooth and quiet and soft-edged, so we softened in some places, for survival, but not everywhere. Not in our cause, not where it counted, and the truth is, we were afraid. Afraid of being forgotten, afraid of failing those who depended on us, afraid of how our stories would be twisted after we were gone. You can feel that fear when you look at old blades. The ones passed down wrapped in cloth, hidden beneath floorboards. They're not relics of pride, they're tools of memory. Someone kept them because they knew. No one will write our names, but this will say, we were here. Sometimes I wonder how many of us never picked up a weapon, but still fought battles just as fierce, against illness, against hunger, against a world that told them they were less. I think of women who stood their ground with nothing more than a broomstick and a prayer, who protected children, who endured beatings, who stitched their dignity together with whatever thread was left. They were warriors too, even if they never learned the blade. That's what I want people to understand. We weren't exceptional. We weren't different from other women. We were the other women. We were ordinary people, in extraordinary pressure. We didn't rise because we were born special. We rose because someone had to. And rising cost us. It cost us soft things. It cost us invitations. It cost us safety, reputation, tenderness. But it gave us something else. A spine, a voice. A sense that even if no one ever said, thank you, even if no one wrote poems for us, we knew who we were. And that was enough. We didn't want to be heroes. We wanted to be safe. We wanted our families to eat. We wanted our sisters to walk without fear. We wanted to sleep at night without a blade under the pillow. But until that world came, we did what we had to do. And if that makes us heroes in someone else's eyes now, that's fine. But to me, We were just people, real, flawed, fierce when needed, kind when allowed. We weren't shining legends. We were grit. We were resolve. We were the ones who kept things standing when everything else threatened to fall. So the next time you hear about a female samurai, don't imagine a goddess in armor. Imagine a woman, bone, tired, hair unwashed, eyes steady, standing where no one else would. Not because she was fearless, but because fear had no place left to hide. That's who we really were. Sometimes, I wonder if we were ever real to the people who came after us, or if we became something else. A rumor, a fantasy, a distant shape in the fog of the past. But I know the truth. We were not a dream. We were not invention. We were here. In calloused hands, in cracked blades, in the silence of women who carried too much and said too little. They say history is written by the victors, but often it's just written by men with ink and time. And what doesn't fit their version of the world, they push to the margins. They soften it, or they bury it. That's what happened to us. Not because we failed, but because we didn't fit. A woman who fights disturbs the order of things. She makes people question what's natural, what's proper, what's expected. So instead of honoring us, they erased us. Instead of telling the truth, they turned us into symbols, or worse, shadows. But we were never ghosts. We were bodies. We were voices. We were here. I remember the cold sting of a naginata handle in winter, the crackle of fire after a long day, the taste of rice after a victory, the weight of silence after a loss. These are not the details of a legend. They are the texture of a life. And even if they forget our names, the fight we lived stays in the bones of this country. It echoes in the footsteps of girls who speak too loudly, who run too fast, who refuse to shrink. We were not heroes. We were not saints. We were women with too much to lose and no one left to fight for us. So we fought for ourselves. And in doing so, we carved out a place in a world that never truly welcomed us. Even now, we don't ask for monuments, just memory, just honesty. Remember us not as legends, but as proof that even in the quietest corners of history, there were women who stood their ground, not to be admired, but simply to survive. We were never gone, just hidden, waiting for someone to look past the myths and see us for what we truly were. Real, rough, necessary, and still here, in every woman who refuses to be erased. You've seen the paintings. You've watched the documentaries. You've read the quotes on coffee mugs. Ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, the land of marble columns, soaring oratory, and minds so brilliant they invented logic before lunch. But let me gently ruin that for you. If you actually woke up in Athens around 430 BCE, it wouldn't smell like inspiration. It would smell like smoke, sweat, and goat dung. The kind of air that clings to your skin and doesn't ask permission. You wouldn't be in a temple. You'd be in a two-room house with no toilet, a leaking roof, and a clay pot in the corner that you really, really hope someone emptied yesterday. You'd sleep on a straw mat. If you're lucky, there's a thin wool blanket. If you're really lucky, there are no fleas in it tonight. And forget about breakfast on the veranda with olives and wine. You're gnawing on barley bread so dry it might qualify as a building material. You dip it in watered-down wine, not because it's fancy, but because clean water can't be trusted. The wine tastes like sour smoke. You drink it anyway. You don't bathe this morning. The public baths aren't nearby, and they're not free. You wipe your face with a wet cloth, maybe splash some rainwater from a jar. The sponge on a stick, shared with your neighbors in the public latrine, is not exactly calling your name. Outside, the street is noise and dust. Merchants are shouting, children are barefoot, and the fish at the market already smells suspicious. And it's only 9 a.m. A man in a soiled tunic tries to sell you a cabbage. You don't make eye contact. Not again. And no, you're not off to debate with Socrates. You're off to carry water, maybe pound grain, maybe scrub clothes. The city hums with activity, but most of it is labor, not philosophy. The glory of Greece? It's built on backs like yours. This is ancient Greece without the poetry. It's hot, it's cramped, it's human. And yet, something about it still breathes. Between the alleyways and arguments, beneath the dust and the dreaming. You're here now. Let's see how long you last. You step back inside, not because it's comfortable, but because the sun's already pressing down like a heavy hand. Welcome to your home. 2 rooms, mud brick walls, a roof patched with straw and broken tiles. If it rains, don't worry, it leaks evenly in every corner. There are no columns, no painted pottery lining pristine white shelves. There's a table, maybe. More like a raised slab of wood on 3 legs, wobbling slightly. You might eat on it. You might knead dough. Sometimes it's just where the cat sleeps. Yes, there's a cat. She's not yours. She belongs to herself, like most things in Athens. The floor? Hard-packed dirt. You sweep it with a bundle of old reeds tied together. Dust rises anyway. You keep sweeping. It's not about being clean. It's about not letting the filth win too easily. There's a small hearth, blackened with soot. That's where most of your life happens. Cooking, heating, light. You share it with smoke, because there's no chimney. The smoke climbs up to the ceiling, thinks for a moment, and comes right back down into your eyes. Overhead, rafters hold up what's left of the roof. Hanging from them, onions, garlic, dried herbs, and someone's laundry. Everything smells faintly of mold and effort. A rat darts across the corner. You pretend you didn't see it. So does the cat. If you're poor, and statistically you are, your house opens directly onto the street. No yard, no garden. Just a wooden door, possibly stolen from a better house, that doesn't quite close. It creaks. Sometimes it jams. Your neighbour's door is 3 steps away, and thin walls mean you know everything about their baby's sleep cycle and their arguments. And they know yours. There's a back room. It's darker, cooler. That's where the family sleeps. Lined up on mats, sometimes 2 to a mat. You get used to the smell of feet. Or you don't. But what choice do you have? If you're a woman, this room is your whole world. You're not expected to go out much. Respectable women stay home. Even the window is high up and small, more for letting heat out than light in. You spend your day in this room, weaving cloth, grinding grain, telling stories to children who keep pulling your hair. If you're a man, you still don't own much. You might have a spear, a dented bronze cup, a wooden chest where you keep one clean tunic, and something that once belonged to your father. A sliver of polished bronze serves as your mirror. What it shows you isn't flattering, but it's honest. And yes, there might be a slave. A boy from Thrace, or a girl from Lydia, bought for a few coins, or taken in war. They sleep near the door, or by the fire, depending on how much you care. The toilet? There isn't one. Not inside. Not anywhere. You use a chamber pot at night, and in the morning, if you're lucky, you dump it into the alley without getting yelled at. If you're unlucky, someone dumped theirs first and didn't aim well. Water comes from the fountain house. You carry it in ceramic jugs that chip and crack with time. You get used to lifting with your knees, or you ruin your back by 30. You've seen men older than that hobble like they're 60. And when it's hot, and it's almost always hot, the house doesn't help. The walls absorb the sun, the roof traps the heat. You try to nap, lying still like bread in an oven. You fan yourself with a reed mat. It doesn't work, but it gives your hands something to do while you melt slowly into the dirt. There is no art here. No mosaics, no frescoes, no scrolls of poetry, unless you make them yourself. And even then, it better be functional. That decorated jug, it's also your only wine cup. The cloth with the fancy pattern, that's the curtain for the sleeping room, or a burial shroud. You'll see it again either way. Yet somehow, this place is alive. You know every creak in the floor. You know which beam groans when the wind changes. You know how far the sunlight creeps in every season. You've patched that wall with your own hands. That smoke-stained ceiling, it holds the scent of every meal your family ever ate. You don't own much, but you know it all deeply. Every scratch, every stain. This is not a temple. This is survival. And in the early morning, when the streets are quiet and the light seeps in soft through the dust, sometimes, only sometimes, it almost feels sacred. Then the neighbour's rooster screams, and you remember, it's another day in Athens, and there's still water to carry. You're hungry. Of course you are. It's only been a few hours since you gnawed on that hunk of barley bread at sunrise, and that was more of an activity than a meal. The thing felt like it was made of sand and sadness. Here's the thing about food in ancient Athens. It's not about pleasure, it's about fuel, energy to work, walk, survive. That's it. And unless you're rich, and statistically, you're not, you eat what's available, not what you crave. Breakfast, if you even call it that, was probably just paksimadi, barley bread so dry it echoes when you tap it on the table. You dunk it in watered-down wine. Not because you're fancy, but because it softens the brick into something almost edible. The wine tastes like wood, smoke, and disappointment. If you're lucky, there's a fig or a few olives. If you're not, there's more bread. And it's the same bread from yesterday, and possibly the day before that. There is no coffee, no tea, no milk, unless you're wealthy or own goats. And even then, warm goat milk on a hot Athenian morning is a test of character. Lunch? That depends. Mostly, it's more bread, or porridge, or whatever's left over. There's a stew sometimes, made with lentils or chickpeas. It's brown, always brown. You don't spice it. You don't have spices. Maybe a pinch of salt if you've got connections. Maybe a splash of sour wine. Maybe a wilted onion. If someone in the family fished early, there might be dried fish. Salty, stringy, chewy, but it counts. There is no dessert. The idea of dessert doesn't exist yet. If you want something sweet, maybe, you'll find a date or a drizzle of honey on a spoon. But honey's expensive. You don't waste it on cravings. You save it for offerings to the gods, or to bribe your children to stop screaming. Dinner is the main event. But main event is generous. It happens after sunset, when the heat dies down. Families gather near the hearth, or on the flat roof if it's cool enough. Again, it's barley or wheat in some form. Boiled, mashed, baked, fried. If you're lucky enough to afford oil that day, there may be lentils again. You don't complain. Lentils are the reason you're still alive. Sometimes there's cheese, hard, crumbly, sharp, made from sheep or goat milk. You chew it slowly because it's rare. Sometimes there are greens, boiled until they surrender. No salad. You're not wasting good olive oil on raw leaves. Those are for livestock. You eat with your hands, maybe with a shard of pottery shaped into a scoop. No forks. Not invented yet. Knives are for butchering, not tableware. Plates are shared. You eat what's near you. You don't take more than your share, unless you want your cousin's elbow in your ribs. Meat? Don't count on it. Meat is for festivals, sacrifices, weddings, funerals, big moments. And even then, most of the good cuts go to priests or rich patrons. You might get a bit of liver, or a bone to suck on. Sometimes the street vendors roast scraps over coals, goat organs, mostly. The smell is better than the taste, but it's warm. And warm food feels like wealth. You don't snack. There are no pastries, no candies, no late-night fridge raids. There is no fridge. There is no night eating. You eat when food's available, when the light allows it. Then you stop. And drinks? Wine. Always wine. But always watered. No one drinks it straight. It's considered barbaric. Drunkenness is for Thracians and fools. You mix wine with water in a crater and pour it into clay cups. Sometimes it's flavored with herbs or sweetened with honey, if you're showing off. There is no beer. That's for Egyptians. And no one trusts Egyptian things, not yet anyway. Water is fetched daily from a public fountain. It's warm. It tastes like stone. But it's free, and you hope no one dropped anything in it that day. Food is communal, yes, but it's not generous. People eat together, but hunger is private. You learn not to stare at someone else's share. You learn to eat fast, not because someone will take your food, but because the fire's dying and the night's cold is creeping in. Sometimes, you go to a symposium, a drinking party. But that's not for your kind. That's for rich men and poets and sandal-wearing thinkers who have time to argue about metaphysics while you're scrubbing fish guts off your tunic. Still, you've passed by one, heard the laughter, smelled roasted pork, wondered what it feels like to eat without doing math in your head. How much oil do we have left? Can we afford more lentils this week? What if the wheat shipment doesn't come? Eating in Athens is never mindless. It's always tied to survival, always tied to math. And yet, there's comfort in the routine. The warmth of lentils at the end of a long day, the hiss of flatbread over hot coals, the soft clink of clay cups in the dusk, a stolen fig from the neighbour's tree, your child's face smeared with chickpea mash, grinning with missing teeth. It's not abundance, but it's enough. Tomorrow, you'll wake and eat again. The same things, in the same way. You'll wish for something new. You'll chew. You'll swallow. And you'll live. Let's get something straight. You're not sitting in the agora, quoting Plato with a cup of wine in hand. You're not reclining under an olive tree composing poetry. And unless you're very rich or very enslaved, you're working, every day, from sunup to sunset, with your hands, your back, your breath, and you're probably already tired. In Athens, work isn't a passion. It's a necessity. It doesn't fulfill you. It feeds you, barely. So, what do? That depends. Most likely, you're either farming, crafting, hauling, or selling something. If you're a man, you might have a trade. If you're a woman, you're working too, though no one will call it that. You spin thread, bake bread, care for children, clean ash, make oil, weave wool, mend every single thing that breaks. But that's just what women do, they'll say. Convenient, isn't it? If you're a farmer, you live outside the city walls. You rise before the sun. You walk barefoot through hard, dry soil that cracks underfoot like pottery. You plant barley, grapes, olives, whatever the land allows. There's no irrigation system. You pray for rain and hope your neighbour's goat doesn't trample your plot. You plough with a wooden stick pulled by a tired ox, or by your own shoulders if the ox died. You dig, lift, carry. You sweat so much you stop noticing. You get blisters on your blisters. And if the crop fails, you borrow, and owe, and worry. You eat what you grow, and sometimes you grow too little. Athens doesn't care. You still pay taxes, still offer a portion to the temple, still wave to the passing merchant who will sell your barley in town for 5 times what you earned. If you're a potter, you spend your days hunched over a spinning wheel, hands in wet clay shaping jars that you'll sell cheap. You stamp them with patterns, geometric if you're lazy, mythological if you're hopeful. Your back aches, your fingers crack, you inhale clay dust and cough at night. You fire your pots in a kiln built by your grandfather. It smokes, wheezes, complains louder than your wife. You don't waste heat. You plan every batch. One misstep, and the whole thing shatters. You can't afford that. If you're a stonemason, you work under the sun, all day, carving stone for temples you'll never enter. Your chisel is dull. Your arms scream. Your tunic soaks with sweat. You build beauty for men who speak your name with contempt. But the stone doesn't care. It listens. It waits. It holds your story better than your own neighbours do. If you're a vendor, you rise early, fight for a space in the agora. You yell louder than the fishmonger next to you. You swat flies, bargain hard, and watch for thieves. You sell cheese that's already turning, or wine you watered down, or olives that nobody wants but everyone ends up buying. You hear politics in the background, philosophers arguing about ethics. You roll your eyes. You're just trying to sell 3 more bunches of grapes before the sun cooks them to mush. And if you're a woman, you do all the above, silently, behind walls. You grind grain with a stone until your arms numb. You weave wool into tunics that others wear to festivals you're not allowed to attend. You care for children with no medicine, cook with no recipes, and mourn quietly when food runs out before the weekends. And if you work as a midwife or healer, you carry herbs in one pouch and fear in the other. If you succeed, you're tolerated. If you fail, you're a witch. Still think you'd rather be a soldier? Fine. Try marching 20 miles with no sandals, sleeping on rocks, eating sour cheese and dried onions, then dying to a spear for a city that might forget your name. War is glorious only in poetry. The truth is, most Athenian jobs are invisible in the scrolls. They aren't recited in plays or etched into temple walls. They're repetitive, dirty, endless, but they're everything. They're the reason temples have floors, the reason philosophers eat, the reason democracy even functions. Someone has to lift, dig, haul, carry, feed, patch, fix, clean, mend. Someone has to do the work that keeps the dream alive, even when the dream isn't theirs. And no, they don't complain much. Because complaining doesn't get the fish sold, doesn't fix the roof, doesn't pay the tax collector standing at your door with a ledger and no soul. Instead, they work, and at the end of the day, they sit on the same hard floor, dip the same barley into the same lentil stew, and take the same deep, quiet breath. So no, not everyone was a philosopher. Most were too busy living to spend time theorizing about life, and maybe that's the real philosophy. Let's talk about something nobody paints on the pottery. You're sweaty. Again, you've been working all day. Grinding, hauling, cooking, walking. Your feet are black with dust. Your hair smells like smoke. Your tunic sticks to your skin. And the idea of feeling clean is distant, philosophical even. Welcome to personal hygiene in ancient Athens. First of all, you don't have a bathroom. Not even a bad one. No toilet. No sink. No mirror, unless you count a dented bronze plate that shows you mostly your pores. Your bathroom is a clay chamber pot in the corner, or, if you're poor, a quiet alley and a strong hope that your neighbors aren't watching. You relieve yourself into a pot. Then you empty it into the street gutter at dawn, with everyone else doing the same. The city smells real, especially in summer. To wipe, a sponge on a stick, shared, at public latrines, washed between uses, hopefully, stored in vinegar water if you're lucky, but don't count on it. Some people just use smooth stones. Some use leaves. Nobody talks about it, because what's there to say? And that's just the easy part. Now let's talk bathing. There's no bathtub in your house, not even a bucket you'd call private. If you want a proper wash, you head to the public bathhouse, a place that's equal parts social hub, hygiene center, and awkward encounter waiting to happen. You walk in, hopefully clothed, and the air is thick with heat, steam, and body odor. The room is stone and echo. Everything echoes. Conversations, sneezes, farts. You hear it all. You strip in front of others. There are no curtains, no cubicles. You rinse off with water someone heated in a bronze cauldron an hour ago. If you're lucky, it's warm. If not, it's lukewarm at best and smells faintly of ash and old feet. There's no soap. Soap is still a foreign idea, somewhere between invention and luxury. Instead, you rub yourself down with olive oil. Yes, actual olive oil, and then scrape it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. Think of it like peeling yourself clean. The oil carries away sweat, dirt, dead skin. It also costs money, so sometimes you skip it, or reuse old oil, or just scrape harder and hope for the best. If you can't afford the bathhouse, you improvise. A cold splash from a cistern, a wet cloth wiped over your limbs. Maybe a neighbor lets you borrow their wash basin. Maybe not. You get used to smelling human. Everyone else does too. Women, by the way, don't go to the public baths, at least not during busy hours. Respectable women stay home. They wash at home, behind curtains, with privacy that's more symbolic than effective. The water's cold, and heating it takes time and wood, which costs. So most of the time, it's a quick wipe and back to weaving. Let's not forget your clothes. You wear the same tunic for days, maybe longer. Washing it means beating it against rocks or scrubbing it with clay ash. No detergent, no lavender-scented anything. You dry it in the sun and hope it doesn't stiffen like parchment. And what about dental hygiene? You chew twigs, rinse with vinegar, rub ashes on your teeth. The results are mixed. You lose teeth early. Your breath smells like wine and onions. No one is surprised. Deodorant? Not a thing. Perfume? Too expensive. You dab olive oil behind your ears, maybe crush some mint leaves if you're fancy. But mostly, you just live with the smell. People smell like people, and that means sweat, dirt, garlic, and goat. Head lice are common. So are fleas. You scratch. They bite. It's a cycle. You occasionally boil your tunic, or shave your head in frustration. People talk more about the gods than they do about hygiene, because the gods don't require soap. Still think you want to live in ancient Greece? Even your heroes stank. Achilles probably smelled like blood and armpit. Socrates, famously unwashed, once claimed the soul was more important than the body. Convenient. But here's the strange part. You survive. You adjust. Your sense of clean shifts. A splash of water on the face feels like luxury. A cool breeze through your sweat-drenched tunic feels divine. You learn to move through grime and dust like it's part of your skin. And when you finally do make it to the bathhouse, stand under a thin stream of warm water, scrape the week off your arms, smell something that isn't yourself, you feel it. relief, reset, maybe even a kind of peace. Because cleanliness, back then, wasn't about spa days or skincare. It was about shedding the day. One scrape, one rinse, one breath at a time. And for one quiet moment, you almost forget that you share your sponge with the fishmonger 2 stalls down. If you were born a woman in ancient Athens, your life is already half written by someone else. You won't debate in the agora, you won't vote, you won't perform in the theatre. You won't be remembered by name unless you do something scandalous or die giving birth. Even then, it'll be your husband's grief that's recorded, not your story. You are not a citizen. You are not a voice in the assembly. You are not the subject of statues or songs. You are, more than anything else, unseen. Let's begin with your home. You rarely leave it, not alone. If you do, you're veiled, covered, glancing downward. You go to the fountain to fetch water, perhaps to a neighbour's courtyard for a wedding or a birth, but only under watchful eyes. Your world is the gynecium, the women's quarters, a separate space in the back of the house, cooler, darker, quieter. This is where you live, and live within. You wake up early, you check the fire, you check the children. If you have a baby, your breast aches before you even open your eyes. If you have a daughter, you already worry about her dowry. If you have a son, you hope the gods let him grow strong, because he will carry the only part of you allowed to walk freely outside. You grind grain, with a hand mill, every day. The same circular motion, back bent, shoulders sore. You make bread, not because it brings joy, but because if you don't, everyone is hungry. You spin wool, you weave, thread after thread, hour after hour. If the cloth is uneven, your husband complains. If it's perfect, no one says anything. That's the expectation. You teach your daughters to do the same. You cook, you clean, you mend, you bleed in silence, you birth in pain. There are no doctors. There is midwife wisdom, passed down like fragile pottery, half heard, half remembered, always essential. You don't talk much to men, unless they're relatives. You don't dine with them when guests arrive. You listen from the other room, behind the wall. You hear laughter, music, politics. You stir stew and listen to them solve the world. They do not ask what you think. And perhaps, after all these years, you don't expect them to. Marriage is not about love, it's about arrangement. You're married off, likely at 14, to a man older, sometimes much older. You move into his house. You don't know the layout. You learn it by accident, by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You find your corner eventually. You call him master before you call him husband. You bear his children. You raise them. If you fail to give him a son, the silence in the house gets louder. His mother looks at you differently. The air gets thicker. You age fast. Not from time, from repetition. If your husband dies, and you have no adult sons, you can't keep the house. You can't inherit. You're passed along to another male relative, a brother, an uncle, like a tunic that still has use, a vessel of lineage, not of opinion. And yet, despite this, you matter. You are the keeper of the hearth, the quiet engine of the home. You maintain rituals that men do not understand. You bathe statues of the goddess. You sing the old songs while preparing burial cloths. You teach your children about the gods, about seasons, about survival. You carry grief. You carry stories. You remember names that no one writes down. You know how many coins are left, how much oil remains, which neighbor had a stillbirth, and which girl is about to bleed for the first time. You are not seen, but you see everything. And sometimes on feast days during festivals you step out, dressed in your finest woven cloak, bangles at your wrist. You walk in the procession, singing hymns, throwing flowers, and for that moment, under sunlight and music, the city notices you, not as a wife, not as a mother, but as part of something sacred, bigger. Then the music fades, and you return home. You tuck your children in. You wash the olive oil off your arms. You fold the cloth you made that day. You sit quietly in the doorway watching the sky fade. And for just a moment, you wonder, if you vanished tomorrow, would they even say your name? But you stay. You stay because you must. Because the home doesn't run without you. Because the world, though it rarely thanks you, still rests in the small things you do. You're invisible in scrolls. But not in life. You are the thread that holds the city together, quietly, endlessly, unnamed, and somehow still whole. By now, you might think life in ancient Athens is all dirt and discipline, labor, smoke, noise, and you're not wrong. But even in a world without smartphones, sofas, or Friday nights, people still craved one thing above all: escape. Yes, there is leisure, there is joy, there is even laughter, if you listen closely enough. Not everyone spends their time in philosophical debates under olive trees. In fact, most people don't. You're far more likely to see someone chasing a chicken than chasing wisdom. And honestly, that chicken matters more to dinner than any idea Plato ever had. So, how do you unwind in a city made of dust and duty? Let's start with the street, the agora. This is where half your day plays out, and not just for buying fish. The marketplace is loud, chaotic, full of drama. Children run barefoot. Vendors shout over each other. Gossip flies faster than pigeons. If something scandalous happens in the city, the agora knows it first. You linger, pretending to admire pottery, but really you're eavesdropping on two men arguing about a goat that allegedly destroyed a neighbor's vine. Everyone listens. No one intervenes. The goat wins by default. If you're lucky, a traveling bard might pass through. He strums a lyre, sings epic tales, Homeric, dramatic, sometimes wildly inappropriate. People drop coins into his bowl. You do too, not because he's great, but because he made your shoulders drop for a minute. That's worth something. Children? They entertain themselves. No toys from the store, just sticks, stones, and imagination. They play knucklebones, like dice, using real animal bones. They chase hoops down dusty alleys. They wrestle, scream, climb on anything that looks unsafe. The rules are simple. Survive until sundown. Your son wants to be a soldier. Your daughter mimics the priestess she saw once in a festival parade. Tomorrow they'll swap roles and forget. And then there's the theatre. Now this, truly, is Athens. Twice a year, the city hosts festivals honoring Dionysus, the god of wine, madness, and performance. The entire population turns out. You walk for hours just to claim a spot. You sit on stone benches from dawn to dusk. The sun burns your face. The man beside you smells like vinegar and goat. No one minds. Because on that stage, everything else disappears. You watch actors in masks tell stories of war, love, betrayal, gods. You cry. You laugh. You shift uncomfortably when someone says something too close to the truth, and you clap with your whole body, because you don't get many chances to feel like part of something bigger than work. It's catharsis. Not just for you, but for the whole city. Even those who can't afford seats get in free, sponsored by the wealthy, as a civic duty. One of the rare moments Athens feels like it belongs to everyone. And after the play, the symposium, no, you're probably not invited. Those are for upper-class men, but you've heard stories. Candles flickering, cushions, wine diluted with just enough water to pretend it's civilized, musicians playing soft notes, poets trying to impress each other, jokes, debates, games, and sometimes things get blurry. The kind of night that starts with a toast and ends with someone passed out in the street wrapped in a toga they don't remember wearing. Still, for the rest of us, entertainment is simpler. You sing while kneading dough, you dance during weddings, you hum old songs to your baby in the dark. On festival days, you wear your best tunic and join the crowds pouring through the city, flower petals in hair, prayers on lips, drums echoing off the walls. You go to see a race, men running naked under the blazing sun. You cheer with everyone else, not because you care who wins, but because for once, the stakes feel light. And of course, there's drinking. Wine is everywhere. In moderation, they say. But moderation has many definitions. You sit outside your doorway in the evening, passing a clay cup between neighbors. Stories flow faster after the third pour. Someone sings, badly. Someone dances, worse. No one cares. Because the lentils boiled just right today. Because your son came home unblooded. Because the tax collector walked past your house for once. Because you are still here. And in a world of constant labor, of endless chores, and quiet survival. These small bursts of joy matter more than monuments. You don't need theatre every night. Sometimes, entertainment is watching two pigeons fight over a fig in the dirt. Sometimes it's telling the same story for the 20th time just to hear someone groan. Sometimes it's sitting in silence with someone who understands what it means to carry so much and drop it, just for a while. And when the stars come out, and the heat finally fades, and the city sighs into darkness, you exhale too. Not because the world is perfect, but because, for a moment, you felt it soften. You don't go a single day without the gods. Not because you're devout in the way modern people mean it. Not because you pray at set hours or read holy books. No, because in Athens, in your world, the gods are everywhere. Not majestic, not distant, just present. In the crack of the hearth, in the sway of olive trees, in the way the bread rises, or doesn't. The divine is stitched into daily life, not abstract, not optional. You begin your morning with a whisper, not to yourself, to Hestia, goddess of the hearth. You sprinkle a bit of barley meal into the flame. It flares, then calms. If it goes out, a bad sign. You relight it, carefully, silently. Above the doorframe, there's a tiny shrine, a lump of clay shaped like a house, or a mask, or just a flat stone with a face scratched into it. That's Hermes, guardian of the threshold. You touch it before stepping outside. Not doing so feels wrong, like forgetting your sandals. Outside, the city breathes godhood. Every corner has an altar, a small one, or just a scorched mark on a stone. Offerings, figs, oil, a few coins, sometimes a bit of honey. Nothing extravagant, just enough to say, I see you. The gods aren't watching from Olympus, they're walking with you. In the market, you pass a statue of Hermes. Again, same god, different task. This one oversees trade. You mutter a small phrase under your breath before handing over your coins. No one hears. Everyone understands. And yes, the big gods matter too. Athena, the wise protector. You see her statue above the city, towering, bronze and fierce. But do you speak to her? Rarely. She belongs to Athens, not to you. You worship her from a distance. She is law, order, vision, but your daily prayers go elsewhere, to the smaller, quieter ones, the ones who still live in kitchens and wells. If you're a woman, Artemis listens when your daughter bleeds for the first time. If you're pregnant, you ask Eileithyia to let the child come gently. If your husband is away, you pour a drop of wine to Poseidon and ask him to spare the ship. No one forces you to do these things, but not doing them feels dangerous, reckless. You've seen what happens when someone forgets a sacrifice. You've seen vines die, ovens fail, goats vanish. Coincidence, maybe, but maybe not. Religion in your world is not about belief. It's about rhythm. You don't question if the gods are real. They are. The question is whether they are listening, whether they are pleased, whether they remember you, so you remind them. Every day, in tiny gestures, a thread tied around your wrist, a charm under your pillow, a broken cup buried beside a fig tree. Not magic, not superstition, just habit, protection, pattern. You attend the big festivals, of course. Who wouldn't? They're loud, beautiful, and absolutely essential. The Panathenaea, a city-wide celebration of Athena. Music, sacrifice, races, plays. You walk in procession, carry baskets of grain, sing songs older than memory. And then there's the Anthesteria, the wine festival. You drink, yes. But you also honor the dead. You leave food at crossroads. You whisper names of those lost. You close your doors tight, just in case their spirits drift too close. Because the veil between worlds? It's thin. Sometimes, frighteningly so. Death is never far. You live next to it, nod at it, try to feed it small offerings, so it doesn't get too hungry. You don't fear hellfire. You fear forgetting. That the gods forget you, that the ancestors forget you, that one day even your name is dust, so you remember first. You teach your children to light the same candles, pour the same oil, sing the same songs. You pass down not wisdom, but practice. And when someone dies, you don't cry loud. You prepare the body, wash it with warm water, wrap it in cloth, place a coin in the mouth. For the ferryman, you know the name, Charon. You've never seen him, but you would never let a loved one go without payment. It's unthinkable. You burn incense. You whisper good words. You mourn not to stop the pain, but to guide the soul home. Even your house knows grief. You cover mirrors. You keep the fire low. You step gently. Grief is not loud here. It's respectful, measured, repeated, like prayer. And through all of this, you don't feel alone. The gods don't speak to you in thunder or visions, but sometimes the bread bakes just right. Sometimes the wind shifts when you pray. Sometimes you find something lost just when you need it most. Coincidence? Maybe. Faith? Definitely. Your gods don't promise paradise. They don't punish with fire. They simply exist. Flawed, powerful, unpredictable, just like you. And in that, there's comfort, because life is hard and confusing and fragile. And if the gods are also chaotic and petty and glorious, well, then maybe you're not doing so badly after all. So, could you last a day? You've made it this far. You've woken up on a straw mat. You've eaten barley that chipped your teeth. You've worked until your arms trembled, sweated through a tunic that hasn't been washed in weeks, wiped yourself with a shared sponge, prayed to gods you don't fully understand, and fallen asleep to the sound of clay pots clinking and someone coughing in the dark. You've lived the life, briefly, of a person whose name was never written down, who never had time to be remembered, who was too busy enduring. And maybe now you understand this. Ancient Greece wasn't built on marble. It was built on repetition, on resilience, on people who kept going. You didn't invent democracy. You didn't write poetry, but you ground the grain. You carried the water. You watched your child get sick and held them anyway. You stayed up late to mend someone else's tunic. You lit the fire. You tended the god. You survived another day. That alone was everything. You might not have lasted long in this world. Modern feet blister fast. Modern hands callous slow. You'd miss clean water, privacy, anesthesia, coffee, air conditioning. You'd miss silence. You'd miss choices. But maybe, just maybe, you'd find something unexpected too. Maybe you'd find satisfaction in small things, in the warmth of bread, even if it's rough, in laughter that comes after hard work, in a neighbor who hands you half a fig without saying why, in the rhythm of prayer not because you fear, but because you remember, in knowing your place in a world both harsh and sacred. This life wouldn't be easy. It wasn't supposed to be, but it would be full of dirt and sound and struggle, full of gesture and grit, full of meaning hidden inside monotony. So could you survive? Maybe not with comfort, but with effort, with grace, with a little humility? Yes, maybe. And when the sun sets behind the temple, and the last embers fade in the hearth, and you lie back on your mat, your back sore, your stomach half full, you might exhale and think, I made it. Not because you were strong, but because, somehow, you learned how to keep going, just like they did.